Hello and welcome to revision tips for CIPS Level 4 Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 1, which is the scope and influence of procurement and supply. Learning Outcome 3, which is to understand and analyse the key aspects of organisational infrastructure that shape the scope of a procurement or a supply chain function. So we're going to look at the key aspects of corporate governance and the impact of policies and procedures on procurement, the different structures that procurement can be formed like, and the common IT systems that can be used. So corporate governance refers to the way in which companies are governed and to what purpose. And it identifies who's got the power and accountability and who makes the decisions. It is in essence a toolkit that enables management and the board to deal more effectively with the challenges of running a company. It ensures that businesses have appropriate decision-making processes and controls so that the interests of our stakeholders are balanced, and that's our sort of shareholders, employees, suppliers, the customers, and even the local community. Now, that governance at a corporate level will include the process through which a company's objectives are set and pursued in the context of things like social, regulatory, or the market environment. So it looks at the practices and procedures for trying to make sure that a company is run in a way that it achieves its objectives, while ensuring that the stakeholders have the confidence that their trust in the company is well founded. So it is important to provide the infrastructure to improve the quality of the decision making, and good quality ethical decision making builds a sustainable business and enables them to create long-term value more effectively. Now, ethics are a set of rules that govern the behaviour of a person, and it's established by a group or culture, but it does refer back to the beliefs of which a person has an enduring preference. In the world of intense competition, every business entity works on certain principles and beliefs, which are nothing but the values. And likewise, ethics is implemented in the organisation to ensure the protection of the interest of stakeholders like their customers, suppliers, employees, the society and the government. So on the screen you can see what the difference is between ethics and values. So ethics are a set of moral principles, whereas the values are the principles or standards of behaviour. So one's more professional, one's more personal. One can vary from profession and the others can vary by individuals, but nonetheless they kind of go along the same theme. Now, conflicts of interest can occur when a person's involvement in an organisational decision may potentially influence or have a conflict of interest which could influence their decisions in favour or to gain a particular person's preference, I suppose. You know, it's about sort of treating people differently because of I don't know, maybe you've got a friendship or a relationship or something like that with a supplier or a colleague or something along those lines. Now, often when public duty conflicts with private interests, it could happen when like a supplier offers a buyer hospitality or gifts, if you've got a partner or a family member working for the organisation. But they present themselves in two ways. There's the actual conflicts of interest that genuinely occur when you have to make a decision that may affect you personally or your family members, or just a perceived one, which is where a procurement professional has a private interest in something that could affect the decision making, but doesn't necessarily mean that it will. So why are conflicts of interest an issue? Let's say an old school friend for one of the suppliers has responded to a tender. And after each one, ask yourself these questions. You know, will I gain financially in addition to my salary from a decision that I'm going to make? Do I have personal relationships with the colleagues or the suppliers? Am I doing an identical role for a competitor maybe? And should I disclose my concerns? And I think if you say yes to any of those questions, or if you are unsure, then it's possible that you do have a conflict of interest. So once you know whether you do have a conflict of interest, the next thing to do is to do something about it. So potential conflicts need to be disclosed and addressed at the earliest opportunity to make sure no unethical behaviour occurs and that the organisation's code of ethics isn't breached. Now, the 4D model you can see on the screen is, it outlines essentially how you can deal with a conflict of interest. Stage 1 is to disclose. The very first stage is to disclose that potential conflict of interest to your organisation. The second would be to distance. So if having disclosed the potential conflict of interest, a manager suggests that you don't have any direct input with a decision or a contract, then you should distance yourself from that contract negotiation. But if you're unable to distance yourself, then you can delegate. You delegate that to a colleague who has no conflict of interest with the supplier. Or finally, disassociate, which is if the contract is really critical to your business and the conflict of interest is real, the procurement professional should disassociate themselves from the deal to make sure they're completely objective in the contract process. And they're quite common in procurement. There's no need to feel ashamed about it or anything like that, but it's just better to disclose them so they can be handled appropriately rather than attempting to conceal it. As long as the actual or perceived conflict is made known to the appropriate person, there's no need for a buyer to be concerned. Now, procurement professionals must conduct their business practice in the most ethical manner, and failing to abide by these ethical practices can lead to immoral and illegal practices such as bribery, favoritism, illegal sourcing, and so on. Now, the immediate reaction to the idea of unsatisfactory procurement ethics is that it will be damaging for public relations. And if those ethics become public knowledge, leaders have to make sure that there are actions that are taken to follow proper ethics, so it can contribute to the success of your business. Now, the CIPS Code of Ethics can really help with this, and the main purpose of the code is to define behaviours and actions which CIPS members must commit to and maintain as long as they're members of CIPS. I would really recommend you go onto the CIPS website and have a look at this code of conduct, because as a member you've agreed to adhere to it. Now, members worldwide are required to uphold the code and to seek commitment to, I suppose, all parties they engage with in the professional practice. And you should encourage your organisation to adopt an ethical procurement policy based on the principles of the code, and raise any concerns to your business that potentially, give you reasons to, wonder whether everything's going to be okay. And do that at the appropriate level within your organisations. Now, the members' conduct will be judged against the code, and any breach may lead to action under disciplinary rules that are set out by the Institute Royal Charter. So members are expected to assist any investigation by CIPS in an event of a complaint being made against them. It would be such a shame to get to the point where you have this, MSIP status, and then you do something that potentially means that that title can be stripped. But top level, what it's asking you to do is enhance and protect the standing of the profession. Don't enter into anything that would bring the institute into disrepute. Don't accept gifts, hospitality that potentially would influence your decision. And just be aware of how you behave outside of work as well, because, if you are, straight-laced at work, but a bit slippery at the weekend, selling stolen goods, for example, that might actually, have a bearing on how people view you as a professional. The second bit is to maintain the high standard of integrity in all your business relationships. So here, what we want you to do is reject anything that doesn't seem right. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Don't use your own authority for gain. Declare your conflicts of interests. Don't breach confidentiality of suppliers' bids or anything like that. And just be honest and truthful in the work that you do. The third bit around promoting the eradication of unethical business practices is really about modern slavery and corruption and things like that. And it wants you to make sure that you're fostering an awareness of this and that you continue to develop your knowledge on these subjects, because they change every year. And as a CIPS member, you can access the CIPS ethics test, which you can take every year. And it's a really good way of refreshing your memory and looking at anything new that's come up. But in terms of your supplier relationships, you must make sure that you do due diligence on your suppliers before you award a contract to them. And then also during your contract, if anything comes to light, you need to take action against it. Fourth part of the code looks at the proficiency and stature of the profession. So do some CPD, continued professional development, lead by example of anyone you're responsible for, and never be wasteful in your job. And finally, just to comply with the laws of the country that you practice in and to fulfill your contractual obligations. Okay, we're now going to look at the policies and strategies. Now, a policy is a guiding principle that shows direction within an organisation. So the procurement policies commonly include things like competition and ethics, key performance indicators, quality, supplier appraisals, evaluations, sustainability and transparency. The procedure, though, is different to a policy. A procedure is a method of undertaking a task. So we often have lots of manuals in procurement that outline the procedures for each task. But these policies and procedures are derived from your organisation strategy. And the strategy is basically a plan that's formed by the senior managers of the organisation. And it sets out what the organisation plans to achieve over the next, 12 months to 5 years possibly. And it will have lots of things on there about things like adding value, cutting costs, building better supply chains locally, considering the environment, ethics, fair trade. Maybe it's around, speed and time, quality, reducing the number of suppliers you've got. I don't know, there's lots of things that potentially you could be looking at. But your procurement strategy must react to market forces like an unexpected economic event, a significant global change in the area of business, or something like a force majeure event. So have a think about a procurement strategy and how you might be affected by things like your single source supplier going out of business. What about one of your suppliers is you've only got one supplier that can meet your policy requirements? What about if a weather-related event like an earthquake or something means that your supplier can't deliver your stock for the next 6 months or something like that? Have a think about how those things affect you. Okay, accountability in procurement essentially means we need to be responsible for our actions and decisions, and having the obligation to report and answer to a designated oversight of the consequences of the actions and decisions that were made. In a public sector, as public servants, they have to ensure that they're following public procurement processes, and they're accountable and exposed to sanctions and remedies for any behaviour that sort of contravene the public procurement legal principles and framework. So moving on to reporting, procurement reporting allows an organisation to demonstrate how its procurement activities deliver value for money, how they contribute to the realisation of broader goals, objectives, and provide a panoramic snapshot of the effectiveness of its procurement strategy. Now, through a host of comprehensive metrics and insightful data, you can glean this by tracking the right procurement KPIs. And reporting gives a business the power to enhance its procurement strategy by preventing minor inefficiencies from becoming significant issues and providing a clear insight into the practices of supplier relationships that work and those that don't. So essentially, the reporting drills down to significant areas of the procurement process and has the power to be able to be kind of improvements that can make or break a business. Like, you can see on here the budget variances, cost reductions, price increases, defects, lots of things that potentially we need to keep our eye on just so that standards don't slip. Okay, we're now going to look at the different types of structures. And if a company is large, this often means that the enterprise has a number of departments like marketing, sales, purchasing, accounts, and so on. And the relationship between the departments are usually well developed, with lots of employees involved with lots of departmental activities. And there's a high level of spend and greater profits are received. But usually this sort of enterprise is involved in a number of projects, both short-term and long-term. So it needs to have a robust team of professionals who manage procurement activities. So here what you can see is that procurement are sitting at the same level as marketing, sales, HR, reporting directly into the board of directors. But conversely, it could actually mean that it could sit beneath one of those directors, and they might view that procurement is part of finance, for example. But here you can see a sort of different example of how procurement might be structured, where you've got sort of even your own type of subsets of the types of roles that different people in procurement do, like stock control or buying or supply management or relationship management or sourcing. So an effective reporting cycle, which usually requires a regular program of data collection, as well as communication and responses, should benefit all reporting organisations, both internally and externally. And the reporting results in increased understanding of the risks and opportunities, influencing long-term management strategy and policy and the business plans, which increases accountability and streamlines processes, as well as reducing costs and improving efficiency. And finally, benchmarking and assessing performance and avoiding poor practice. So you can see here, define the clear roles, promote a sense of ownership, provide control and support, and focus on the positives. Now, in any purchasing department, there has to be procurement procedures. There are a group of directives that detail what can and cannot be done, as well as how each activity must be undertaken. And most companies publish their procurement procedures so that all can see them. It's not only companies that have procurement procedures, governments, local governments, and even countries have them as well. There are rules and regulations that keep the purchasing legal and appropriate. So here you can see, who's got the responsibilities. It's all about, the authorities to make decisions. What competition regulations do I need to follow? Who has the delegated authority? And that's usually based on the value of the project. Who's responsible for different sourcing decisions, and how do payments get approved? And you can use a RACI matrix to help you to identify who's responsible, who's accountable, and who you need to consult or inform at different stages in your procurement. So looking at the authority levels, procurement in some organisations is managed through a system of delegated authority. And the delegated authority is governed by monetary threshold limits. Now, heads of business units may further sub-delegate procurement authority to their staff in writing, but they retain the overall responsibility. So records of all staff within procurement should indicate the scope and duration of their delegated authority. So it's just a simple one on the screen. Is the spend below or above 10,000? Yes. If it is, then you can only do this if you are, those that don't have the authority are the junior buyers and the expediters. But if not, then others can do that. Now, competition regulation aims to control monopolistic, unfair and restrictive trade practices. And it does that by creating a set of policies that enhance competition or creative outcomes in a market. Competition policies are intended to promote efficiency, to maximise consumer or social welfare, and to help the creation of a business environment which is based on fairness and leads to efficient resource allocation, and in which abuse of market power is prevented or curbed. These policies usually include relaxed industrial policy, as well as trade policies, conducive entry or exit conditions, and reduced control and greater reliance on market forces. And the regulatory agencies serve two primary functions in government. They implement laws and they enforce the laws. Regulations are the means by which regulatory agency implement laws enacted by legislature. So here you can see loads of regulators. So you've got Ofcom for telecoms, Ofwat for energy. But yeah, there's lots of different ones on there that essentially regulate what's been passed by law. Now, in terms of the reporting structures, this refers to the authority relationships in a company. So who reports to who? From a small business with only a couple of employees, that structure is often self-evident. Everyone reports to the owner. With enough new employees, though, coordinating everyone's efforts will likely demand a formal organisational structure. This framework established who's in charge of different tasks, who's in charge of different departmental areas, and who's in charge of the organisation as a whole. These authority boundaries and the relationships among people in authority serve to create the reporting structure. Now, some procurement departments may have separate specialists reporting and responsible for key procurement activities or stages. In this example, there is a separate team responsible for planning procurement and implementation. In smaller organisations, there may only be one person or a few people who have to do the whole process. But there are many different functions. So have a think about some of the departments that are in your organisation. These are sort of the common ones you'll see. Procurement, we know what they're there for. Sales, they'll be there looking at, bringing in new customers and generating orders. Finance, to pay suppliers and do the budgeting, set credit limits. HR, to find the relevant staff. Operations, possibly in a manufacturing context, this is people that are, converting goods from raw materials. And design and research, having a look at new ideas. Now, all of the internal functions work towards implementing the strategy of your business. So cross-functional working needs to happen when individuals from different departments collaborate in order to share knowledge and consider aspects from various perspectives. And they do this so they can achieve the best value for the organisation. And by involving other functions in the procurement process, you can improve efficiency and effectiveness. Procurement has a strategy and key policy in place, which can all act as guides for the process under which they exist. And some of these policies are in the relation of the specific events, while others have company-wide impact. So an example of a wider policy which could have a broad reach is the Corporate Social Responsibility Policy, or CSR. So you may have implemented an element of this policy which mandates the use of CSR procedures with your first and second tier suppliers. Now, unlike policies, procedures describe patterns of work and tend to detail the necessary steps to complete a task, sometimes big, sometimes small. But the term procurement strategy refers to a long-term plan to cost-effectively acquire the necessary supplies from a list of efficient vendors who will deliver quality goods on time, abiding by the procurement terms. Now, typically, a procurement strategy depends on the number of factors like operations, the available budget, how much competition there is, and possible risks and so on. But they'll focus on options like reducing costs and mitigating the risks and expanding organically. Organisations can choose to focus on a single priority or more than one, depending on their business requirements. The International Labour Organization is devoted to promoting social justice and internationally recognised human and labour rights, pursuing its founding mission that social justice is essential to universal and lasting peace. It brings together governments, employers and workers as representatives of the member states to set labour standards, develop policies and devise programs promoting decent work for all women and men. In support of the goals, the ILO offers expertise and knowledge around the world, and it's acquired by responding to the needs of people everywhere for decent work, livelihoods and dignity. It serves in a variety of ways, including the formation of international policies and programs, creation of international labour standard, an extensive programme of international technical cooperation and training, as well as education and research. Now, the international labour standards are legal instruments that are drawn up by the ILO's constituents. The ILO governing body has identified 8 fundamental conventions covering subjects that are associated to be fundamental principles and the rights at work. So you've got things like the freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining. This is about the ability to join a union. The elimination of all forms of compulsory labour, as well as child labour. Removing discrimination in respect of employment and occupation, whether that be on the age, the there's loads and loads of protected characteristics that you could be discriminated against. Now, forced labour refers to a situation in which persons are coerced to work through the use of violence or intimidation, or by more subtle means such as accumulated debt, retention of identity papers, or threat of, I don't know, immigration authorities or something along those lines. Now, forced labour and contemporary forms of slavery are things like debt bondage, human trafficking, and closely related terms, though not identical in the legal sense. Now, look at the different structures of procurement. So, centralised procurement can leverage scale and drive compliance, whilst devolved structures can be close to our business needs and help nurture innovation. We can go for a hybrid centre-led approach, which is possible, but organisations must ensure the right type of reliable spend and performance data is available to support the central procurement team. Now, procurement governance tends to be centralised, especially during difficult times, and more devolved in growth periods. Procurement, I suppose, would be wise to build structures flexible enough to adapt quickly to changing needs. And using appropriate key performance indicators to monitor procurement operations, you can ensure it's delivering according to the corporate objectives, which may change as the business environment fluctuates. So in terms of how it works and stuff, here is a table of the 3 types of structures. So you've got the centralised, the devolved, and the hybrid. So let's start with the centralised first. The vast majority of our purchasing is undertaken by one department, often in a single location. And the structure is often implemented by large organisations that have considerable spend to manage across multiple sites. Devolved procurement on the left occurs when various individuals within an organisation are given responsibility for their own procurement. So each department manager will have their role of managing the budget and making the purchasing decisions within it. And there are advantages and disadvantages to this structure. And in some cases, an organisation's objectives or policies are not suited to either centralised or devolved. And in these situations, a mixture of both structures, known as the hybrid structure, can be adopted. So one of the first types of designs is something known as a clan, which is a centrally led action network, which is a model for organisation for their procurement. The clan concept assumes a decentralised model with procurement staff operating within the various business units of an organisation. The main reporting line for each of these staff members is the team leader of the local business, but they have a dotted line to report into the small procurement centre, which is usually located at the head office. The central team set the standards, policies and direction and the coordination of activities in order to minimise duplication of effort and maximise synergies across the business units. Now, the clan's attraction is that it provides a powerful, more stable yet flexible alternative to centralised or decentralised management of their business function. And it's been successfully applied to organisations of other business disciplines. So the advantages and disadvantages is that it does promote economies of scale, more efficient use of resources and a reduction in expenses. But the downside is it doesn't actually always support the local economy. You might end up with increased bureaucracy and less accountability. The devolved one does not necessarily mean out of control, and decentralised does not mean less structured. Now, many organisations have swung between centralised and devolved models of procurement, and there is a greater understanding that approaches must be specific to each organisation's own situation, and that different major spend categories may have different approaches. So in a devolved operation, it was, and still is, not even procurement professionals who engage with suppliers. But it's human resources, it's IT, it's operational line managers who interact regularly with the markets. Now, the advantage allows for fewer overheads and duplication of staff efforts, and resulting costs are negated, and all activities are standardised. Many staff no longer have to spend time on low-level ad hoc purchasing, and volume purchasing means that better prices, greater discounts, and more agreeable terms can be obtained. Volume deliveries cut down on delivery charges and staffing costs to move and store the goods. And our computerized system can be used to automate some of this work. But the downside means that purchase requisitions and ad hoc goods have to be sent from other areas to the purchasing department, which can cause delays and can cause some irritations, especially if the company is very geographically diverse. Let's look at a hybrid model. A hybrid model adopts a pick and choose approach to procurement. So you've got a central leadership structure that's supported by local managers with some degree of autonomy. But advances in technology have made this much easier, as communication and working processes can be more nimble, letting directives filter through hybrid structures more quickly than they could have done a few years ago. But it's easy for organisations to adopt a hybrid model and end up with the worst of both worlds. And it's particularly the case for smaller businesses where a single ordering manager feels overwhelmed and starts adding subordinate functions on an ad hoc basis, and it leads to a tangled web of authority and leadership. The most effective hybrid systems maximise communication along the organisation chart to ensure core standards are maintained and aggressively take advantage of technology to facilitate these goals. And then we've got consortiums. A purchasing consortium can be defined as two or more independent organisations that join together, either formally or informally, or through an independent third party. And it's for the purpose of combining their individual requirements for the goods or services they buy to leverage more added value price, better service and technology from their existing suppliers that could be obtained if they did it on their own. Now, purchasing consortiums go by many names, including purchasing groups, group purchasing organisation, federal organisations, and international purchasing organisations, but they all have the same goals, and their differences are mainly in their structure, their vertical focus. And the advantage here is that you've got the sheer volume of purchasing demand amalgamated by a decent size, providing each member with economies of scale that they couldn't have done on their own. And by increasing the volume of the intended award, you're able to generate and able to get lower prices for the goods and services being awarded. It does also help to streamline your processes, and it doesn't only reduce the unit cost, but reduces your transaction costs, since only one contract needs to be negotiated and implemented. But there can be resistance within an organisation of using a third party. It might be internal belief that an external couldn't know the company's business well enough to make the right decisions. But since the contract is between the third party and the supplier, there is a good chance that a new supplier will be selected, which could mean the loss of a current relationship or an incumbent. And if the organisation's current structure is selected, the relationship could be weakened. So that was one of the main hybrid structures of the consortium, but there are shared services, lead buyer structures, and outsourcing. We'll talk through those in a second. So let's look at shared services. Most commonly used for human resources, admin, IT, and finance. The objective of shared services is to create uniformity in the policies, procedures, and standards, to create continuous improvement and to save costs while improving the quality of the services that are being provided. And they're used by some local authorities in the UK in order to reduce costs. So you're consolidating your operations, and they're cost effective because they centralise the back office operation that are used by multiple divisions of the same company, and they eliminate redundancy. Some companies use a chargeback system to build divisions that use their service on a per use basis or a per quarter or per year basis. Other companies just absorb the cost of their shared service as part of the continued running of a business. And today, most companies employ a shared service model for their finance, HR, and information technology. I think it will reduce costs, help you to provide a high level of skill and knowledge, focus on your core activities, pool your resources, avoid duplication of work, and then all your information is held in a central location. But the downside is department confidentiality could be at risk, and there's a resistance sometimes to change your workforce. New processes and procedures take time to adopt, and auditing will definitely be more challenging. And sometimes the information is not readily available within the departments. Let's look at outsourcing now, and when should you outsource? So outsourcing is when an external provider carries out a service that's previously been done in-house. And it can fit into a hybrid structure. The procurement activity that occurs by outsourcing can work alongside the other strategies, whether through a centralised, devolved consortium or led by a led structure. Now, procurement can be outsourced in very large organisations or small organisations for much different reasons. So small organisations, for example, may lack the knowledge or don't require a full-time role. But some of the multinational organisations believe that outsourcing some or all of their procurement enables them to focus on their core activities while saving resources and maximising profit. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. You can reduce your costs, reduce your overheads and training costs. You'll get economies of scale, access to high-skilled buyers, and ability to focus on your core competencies. The downside, though, is it's very difficult to manage the change from an internal point of view. You do lose some control, and you need to ensure that the time spent managing that outsourced supplier is less than the time spent on the previous task. You can get problems with systems for the outsourced function, and you may end up with redundancies. So outsourcing for me is about doing it if the supplier can do it better and cheaper than you can. Now, the lead buyer role. This is defined where, I suppose, procurement responsibilities are delegated to a designated member of a user department of a particular category. So you might see this a lot in IT, IT will do all of the procurement so that they've got the same kit and design and technology. The key benefit is that our user departments are closely involved with the procurement decision. They're not procurement professionals though, so they may still require some support from the centralised team. Now, in business, building rapport plays a prime role. An excellent rapport manifests excellent communication, which clearly will help you to negotiate better. By being communicative, attentive, responsive, and approachable, procurement professionals can build rapport with their suppliers and gain a competitive advantage over decision making. So how do you do that? Positive body language, making eye contact when you're speaking to your supplier, listen and give positive gestures, smiling and nodding, that type of thing. Ask questions, be empathetic. Respect all ideas, don't dismiss them. Remove any preconceptions, be honest and just justify options and give feedback. Now, information is essential to the running of a supply chain. Technology is also used to support the usage and transfer of information with the organisation and between the different departments that might need it. So there are 3 commonly used management information tools that you can see on the screen. So you've got the databases and the database management, and here what you do is you capture and store data in a structured way so that you can share it or go back and check it at a later date. Your decision support systems will be things like spreadsheets and computer models that examine the effect of different inputs and scenarios to help you plan an outcome or a decision. Management information systems are the ones that are recording, storing and analysing a wide range of sales, purchase, P2P, point of sale, inventory, HR, financial, business intelligence, and it's all to support management decision making. And one of those is a P2P system. So this process connects procurement and the entire supply chain process with a company through the goods receipt process and finally to the payment issued to your supplier. In addition to reducing overall supply chain and inventory costs, improving the purchase to pay process can add visibility that allows management the opportunity to have better communications with the supplier as to where an item is, certainly in the delivery process, and when the payment is likely to be made. So here we can see how technology might be involved in running the purchase to pay. So from the issue of specifications to receiving the tenders and bids, through to issuing the contract, receiving goods and facilitating the payment. So let's look at some of the things that can be used in the P2P element of a procurement process. We've got electronic data interchange, which is sharing of data and information through systems. Online track and trace, which is an automated tracking of goods. And they use things like radio frequency ID or GPS. Expediting by exception is an automated process to deliver most transactions with exceptions highlighted for manual intervention. Receipting and inspection would be scanning the goods and logging the goods in rather than manually checking them. Electronic payments is a funds transferred electronically. The contract management systems makes the process of working with suppliers and managing the relationship easier. And database, which is used for data to drive activity and tracking by using database storage. And here we can see the range of integrated tasks performed by inventory control and information systems. Many organisations use technology-based systems to control their warehouse and manage the stock. The system is often linked to other functions for the purpose of planning, and it's important that any system introduced into your warehouse and stock control will achieve the required objectives. So you've got things like capturing goods inwards information accurately, integrating this information with stock balance, contract management and payment systems, recording stock movements and locations and translating issue requisitions into stock picking and packing, maintaining the stock balances and stock valuations, or even triggering automated replenishments, requisitions, monitoring productivity and utilisation, and maintaining stock integrity. You can also produce evidence of stock movements for invoice verification and audit trails for producing management reports using all or any of the data I've mentioned already. So on the screen you can see MRP and just-in-time, MIP JIT. These systems can be implemented to manage inventory effectively. So the MRP system uses base information to calculate how much of each component is needed to be ordered and when. And what it does is it relies on the correct base information being entered at the outset. Incorrect information could cause a failure in the process. So you need to understand what the bill of materials are. You need to understand the minimum order quantities. And when a procurement is developed or changed, the information relating to that product needs to be updated too. And failure to do so can lead to creating surplus stock that cannot be utilised. The MRP will automate the calculation so there's less room for error. Now, just in time on the right-hand side is a method for having inventory arriving at the point when it's needed, reducing waste in the supply chain by making sure that inventory is not held unnecessarily. It helps to make an organisation more efficient by allowing you to maintain a low inventory, removing the need for manual ordering processes. So the supplier works to a specific lead time and delivery times to make sure that the production never stops and that the stores department doesn't have to have excess amounts of inventory. Now, just-in-time is a cost accounting purchasing strategy. You purchase the goods so that they're delivered just as they're needed to meet the customer demand. Now, with just-in-time, when you get customer orders, you plan the purchases. You purchase the minimum number of items to meet the customer demand. And JIT purchasing typically results in more smaller orders and frequent deliveries. And the goal of it is to reduce the carrying cost of the inventory. Less inventory on hand means you pay less on storage and insurance, but it also requires less cash in the short term. There are several benefits to this, but there are also risks, so you need to manage them, I suppose, carefully. And if you don't, you may have stock outs, which can lead to loss of business. And as with MRP, the accuracy of the electronic system is reliant on inputting the correct information at the beginning. So looking again at MRP, MRP stands for Materials Requirement Planning. The systems are other applications of technology. It uses information provided by a management information system. It looks at things like the bill of materials, which is essentially a list of components or ingredients that's needed. It looks at the inventory files and explodes or cascades the end product into various assemblies, sub-assemblies or components at different levels. But notice the system above starts with orders and forecast orders, which then feeds into something called the master production schedule. Hence why multiple data feeds from various parts of the organisation are needed for this system to work efficiently and reliably. There is another inventory management system I want to tell you about on top of MRP and JIT, and that's the Kanban model, which is linked to continuous change and aims to refine and improve the work system. Now, this theory is about maintaining an acceptable level of inventory. It aims to ensure that your organisation never runs out of stock it needs to make, yet holds, I suppose, a tiny surplus amount which ties in the business cash unnecessarily and requires valuable storage space. So you can see on the screen you've got two bins. Bin 1 is full up with the maximum stock, and bin 2 will be used to to cover the time when it would take for the replenishment order to arrive. But as soon as bin 1 is empty, essentially bin 2 comes forward and it triggers an alert to say you need to reorder the stock. Bin 2 should hold enough in stock to get you over the lead time. And Kanban, I think, is Japanese for signpost or billboard. So, that when that bin becomes empty, it's signaling to you that a replenishment order is needed. Okay, we're now going to look at ERP. We're nearly at the end. So ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, and it's defined as the ability to deliver an integrated suite of business applications. The ERP tool shares a common process and data model covering broad and deep organisational end-to-end processes. And these are things like finance, HR, distribution, manufacturing, service and supply chain. The ERP applications automate and support a range of business, administrative and operational processes across multiple industries, although it works really well in manufacturing. But it does include line of business, customer facing, admin, even the asset management aspects of an enterprise. So the ERP deployments are complex and expensive endeavours. Some organisations struggle to define the business benefits. Now, having strong IT communication is vital for any organisation in this day and age. Without it, your stakeholders, your managers, your administrators and employees won't be on the same page. And this can result in a lot of unnecessary confusion and miscommunication. So by strengthening your IT communication, you can ease the process for the stakeholders, the managers and administrators, as well as the end users. Thank you for watching.